Welcome to Get Real, talking mental health and disability, brought to you by the team at IRMA 365.
Join our hosts, Emily Webb and Corinza Louis-Smith, as we have frank and fearless conversations with special guests about all things mental health and complexity.
Get Real is recorded on the unceded lands of the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation. We acknowledge and pay our respects to their elders, past and present. We also acknowledge that the first peoples of Australia are the first storytellers, the first artists, and the first creators of culture, and we celebrate their enduring connections to country, knowledge, and stories.
Then all of a sudden I was on a national TV show. I just started doing the work, on this self-development, self-discovery journey. And it was really, really hectic for my mental health and, social anxiety, what public was saying about you, like people coming out from the woodworks that I went to school with, saying things about me. It was really, really tough.
Hi everyone, it's Emily Webb here. Our guest for this episode is a dynamo. Heidi Anderson's got influence, and as she's on her personal journey of confidence and being her authentic self, she's bringing others along on the ride. Heidi's had a successful career in radio, including The Breakfast Show in Perth on Hit 92.9. She was a contestant in Big Brother and is also a podcaster. When she spoke vulnerably on air to listeners about her battle with hating herself and her anxiety, her honesty sparked a reaction she never imagined. It's changed her life and revealed her purpose. Heidi's written a memoir called Drunk on Confidence, and she's joined me on Get Real to tell us all about it. Heidi, I'm so thrilled that you are joining us on Get Real.
Yay! Thank you. I have to say, my best friend is a massive fan of you on your other podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, when I told her that you were interviewing me, she was like, get out. Oh my God. She's addicted to yours and Michelle's podcast.
Oh, well, thank you to her for listening. Yeah, it's funny when you probably find it where you've got like a big public profile, like I'll be at the kids' footy or something, or at work. I had it in another job where like I'd worked with someone for 3 years and they're like, I just realized that you are Emily who does the podcast. So it's like, yeah, it's like a very segmented kind of thing, I guess, for me.
Yeah, it's so funny because I do a podcast with my hubby called First Time Parents as well. And he has people at work like, oh my God, your wife's Heidi. Oh my God, Griff. So that means you're Griffo oh my gosh. And it's the same thing because he keeps it quite quiet. Whereas I'm like, I'm here, everyone.
People are really into it. And I think podcasting skills are just so beneficial now.
Yes. Yeah. Well, look, I don't do the editing or anything like that on my podcast. I just show up and talk like I have here today.
Most important. Well, Heidi, for our listeners, and we've got a really broad base of listeners. So who is Heidi Anderson? They're going to find out when they read your book and listen to your podcast.
Oh my God, there's so much to say. That's such a loaded question because who am I? And it's so funny because on my podcast, I ask people to describe themselves and it's like quite tricky for people. So if you want to stalk me, you can. I'm no Kimmy K online, but you probably will find me in my bra and undies because I am the girl who walked recently through a shopping center in my bra and undies, basically saying a big fat fuck you, if we're allowed to swear, or a big fat F you to beauty standards and unrealistic expectations, society. And before that, I was the girl who was petrified to get her arms out. I was wearing a cardigan for years and years and years in summer, too afraid to show up as who I truly was. And so I am the girl who just wrote a book called Drunk on Confidence. It's a memoir that you've just read, Emily. I worked in breakfast radio for over 10 years. So that was, my skill set, I guess you could say. And then I've now been coaching women and I've just written my memoir. I'm a mum to Memphis. I'm a wife to Griffo. Like I said, we've got a podcast together, First Time Parents. But I'm also someone who is on a mission to really keep revealing my authentic self. And that is through taking my mask off every day, the different masks that I've been, wearing my whole life. I'm on a huge path of self-discovery. And I think you'll read that in my book. You'll hear that when I talk to you today. And I just want to be the best version of myself and be better than I was yesterday. And so, yeah, I share all that on my Instagram and I share all that, through my podcast and that as well. Was that it? Did I give enough information on who I was?
Yeah, it's fabulous. You had that long career in radio, commercial radio.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's a tough gig. And I guess to the outsider looking in, it is cool. It is glamorous
Yeah.
at times, but the picture can be different. And I guess you got that gig after you were in Big Brother.
Well, no. And see, this is the thing that I always come out to protect myself. So I worked at the radio station when I was at uni, and I grew up in country town called Bathurst, and I did work experience there. And then I went and worked overseas in my uni degree, public relations. And then I came back and got into the Australian Film, Television, Radio School. And I worked really fucking hard always was getting just passes at uni. But then when I found radio and went to the Australian Film, Television, Radio School, first time in my life, I got high distinction. And so I was so passionate about radio. And then I got my first gig in Warrnambool in Victoria. Then I moved to Bunbury and had 2 years of breakfast radio there. Then I was promoted to Newcastle. And with the first few months of working in breakfast radio in Newcastle, I got the call up to do Big Brother. And the producers had come on our radio show that day. They were in town looking for people for the show. And I'd auditioned every single year. And it was the year before, when I was living in Western Australia, that I was like, if they don't pick me this year, that's it. I'm done. I had to cut it off because I had this yearning to be on the show. Like, it was a bucket list thing for me to do, and they kept rejecting me. And I have huge rejection wounds. Why the fuck I worked in radio and put myself on reality TV, you'll soon find out in my book and you'll hear all about that. But they showed up that day and I said, why didn't you bloody get me on there in the past? And they saw something in me that day and they said, we want you to come back and we're going to push you through to, halfway through the rounds today. If you come and audition, we think there's something, with you. And I knew from then, I was like, I'm on the show. I just had this intuitive hit, you are going to get on the show. So I went with it. And then I went on to Big Brother, and I talk about it in my book, and I talk about it very publicly now that my anxiety kind of went public. I was on the start of this self-discovery journey. I'd been the girl on breakfast radio in Bunbury in Western Australia who declared on air that I hated myself. And that was huge for getting onto the airwaves, being the funny fat girl in quotation marks. That was a massive moment of vulnerability. And then I moved up to Newcastle, and then all of a sudden I was on a national TV show. I just started doing the work, on this self-development, self-discovery journey. And it was really, really hectic for my mental health and, social anxiety, what public was saying about you, people coming out from the woodworks that I went to school with, saying things about me. It was really, really tough. And then I went into a high profile job here in Perth doing breakfast radio for 6 years on a brand new show with a couple of guys, Will and Woody, who now do a drive show on Kiss FM. And there was a lot of pressure and it created a monster within me. There was anxiety already there for someone who was constantly searching for validation, who had that rejection wound. And getting to that place was, it's been a journey.
Yeah. And you were somewhat really of a trailblazer in being quite vulnerable with talking about anxiety and your lack of self-belief back then, before you were on the national radio program. And you do talk about in your book that these things were pre-existing. It didn't just come up from doing radio, studying, Big Brother, all that. So can you tell me a bit about what you now understand from your earlier years? And I find it also curious that I put myself in this too, that we tend to seek these kind of jobs and stuff, even though it's unbelievable lack of confidence.
Yeah. And, and I think that's what my whole book is about, how I've unleashed that confidence, because we all have it. We're all born with this confidence. When we're young kids, think about how confident kids are. They've got to be confident to walk. They've got to be confident to do all these different things, to use their voice. And, and then we get it battered out of us through just one conversation, someone saying pipe down, or you're not good enough, or, teacher telling you, I got told, to always be quiet. Put a sock in it, Heidi, or whatever they would say, or they would try and bribe me with food because to keep me quiet. That's just hectic. But looking back, and you'll see this, and I talk about it in my book, I really bring awareness to the mean girls that I've got going on in my head. And they've always been there. Now I'm friends with them. Now they don't arrive so much because I have found that inner champagne confidence that I call it, and unleashed that confidence from within. But when I look back, I can't pinpoint exactly all the things that happened for it all to start, but I tell a few stories in my book. And one of them was, to be successful, you had to be skinny. And so that started for me from looking in magazines when I was younger and seeing all the bigger ladies or whatever on the front cover, and then them saying how they'd had to lose weight, or she lost 12 kilos in 12 weeks, or, you know, Paulini on Australian Idol back in the early 2000s being told that she looked too big in that gold dress. So that was the start of those narratives. Came from the media, came from society, came from advertising, you know, that I've got too much cellulite, that I should be this certain way. And then I remember my first kiss. I was 12 years old. I still remember wearing like my sports girl t-shirt. Like, do you remember when just the sports girl written across the front?
Yeah, I do.
Right. Yeah. And I still remember, I must have been like 12 or 13, and we're all playing around in Bathurst in New South Wales, and there were boys there, and everyone was like, yes, Heidi, it's your turn. You're going to kiss Matthew. And I was like, oh my God, like I'm going to have my first pash with like actual pash. I was so nervous, like probably now, like got the pasty mouth. And then we ended up kissing, and I was so thrilled. Like I'd had the first kiss, like it was so much, it was fun. It was that genuine joy. And then when the boys walked away, I heard like, ha ha, you kissed the fat one. And those voices that I had going on in my head that aren't really mine, that was society, that were, you know, maybe a conversation that I'd heard through an advertisement or whatever, that voice got validated in that moment of, see, I told you so. And I call her self-loathing Sally. Self-loathing Sally in that moment went like, see, told you so. You have to be skinny to be liked, to be successful. That's where, for me, like I look back at these moments, and it's not the boys' fault that I went on this crazy journey from there of self-hate and drank so much and slept around and took drugs and, you know, and really treated myself like shit. It's not their fault at all, you know, and, you know, because I know I've been mean to people and said things, and the way that my mind works as well, I was treating myself like shit for years. It's how we are as humans. We have these voices in our head, but we're not taught about awareness when we're young. We're not taught about the ego. We're not told about these voices in our head that we don't have to believe our thoughts. And so that's kind of what I talk about in my book, because it was such a big part for me. And so when I did speak openly on the radio show 10 years ago in Bunbury, you know, that just overtook and has changed my whole life. When I said I hated myself, that was self-loathing Sally, because I used to see her all the time whenever I looked in the mirror, and those voices would get really, really, really loud. And like I said, through the work and everything that I've done now, it's becoming aware and speaking up and saying like, hey, actually, that isn't me. That isn't who I am, is how I've got to where I am today. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I was
like, that was a long one from me.
And, you know, there's such an intersection with, you know, mental health, diet culture, eating disorders, using stuff to self-medicate. I mean, it's all intertwined. And, you know, I'm nearly 46. I've got 2 daughters, and I'm like, you just see diet culture everywhere. It's just absolute bullshit, and it's toxic. And I used to look at the pictures of the supermodels, because I was a teenager back when the supermodels were like reigning supreme. And I'm tall. People go, you're a big girl, you're tall. And, you know, those battles over the years with, you know, eating and drinking and all that stuff, I really get it. And for you, your breakthrough sort of came through a breakdown, essentially.
Yeah.
And you were really open about your battle with anxiety. And can you tell me a little bit about that? It's in the book, and, you know, it's documented in newspaper articles, because I think it really resonated with people.
Yeah, it did. And so I had 2 breakthrough moments. So the first one was the self-hate one in Bunbury. That was in 2012. And then 2016, I'd come out of Big Brother. So Big Brother was 2013. I'd come out of there. I'd been working in breakfast radio with Will and Woods. And on air this one day, my boss had asked me, I had a new boss. She was intrigued about anxiety because of the way that I was behaving. Like for the 6 weeks, I was having really dark days. I was getting picked up off the bathroom floor by my husband, struggling to get out of bed. I was drinking a lot. And she asked me what it felt like and what anxiety was like. Would you talk about it? And I remember I wasn't ready, and I wrote it down because I was writing for one of the papers at the time, Perth Now and News Corp and Mamma Mia. And I wrote it down, and I was like, that's literally how I feel. Like that's there in black and white. And I sat on it for a few weeks. And then it came just one day on air and I was like, I've got to speak about it today or I'm probably not going to speak about it again. And I opened up on air and it went viral in the sense that they put it on Facebook of a video of me. They recorded it and it was shared all around the world. I had people messaging me from the UK. But it wasn't just women who felt seen, that felt like I was in their head. That was what I got a lot from women. But it was actually partners. And it was mothers and brothers and dads and sisters saying, I now understand my whoever that has been going through anxiety. You've just put it into words. And so that for me was huge because in that moment, I realized that I wasn't alone. And now that's my mission, to constantly talk and tell stories so that other people feel less alone. Because in that moment, I felt like, wow, I don't have to do this. All these thoughts were going through my head. Oh, I thought I always had to do it alone, that this was not normal and all this shit. And so in that moment, I was like, wow, I'm not alone anymore. And then I gave other people the permission slip to speak up as well. And so I talk in my book from that breakthrough, which obviously led from a breakdown. But Brené Brown, thank you very much for coming into all of our lives.
We love Brené.
Power of vulnerability. If you haven't watched that TED Talk, please go stalk it out because it changed my life. I had that moment. And from there, it made me just ask so many more questions to myself. I got curious. I dived deeper into, the mental health work, doing EMDR with my psychologist, like talking to her, having sessions with her. I started doing workshops for women with anxiety whilst I was also on air. And I started these conversations and I started speaking up, and people sliding into my DMs constantly asking like, how are you the girl only like a few years ago who was saying that she hated herself on the radio here in Western Australia, to now like you've got this new sense of confidence. And, I'd really pushed through my anxiety. Like, I don't even like to say that I have anxiety now. I experience anxiety at times, and it's been around a little bit this week with my book and my book launch and that kind of thing. But I've got the tools now, and I know that it's not going to last, and I know that it doesn't define me. And that's been huge for me. So that whole self-discovery and understanding has been through watching YouTube videos, reading books, listening to podcasts like this, that actually there's so much free stuff out there that we can change our lives. And, I just got curious with my mental health, and it's led me to here.
Living experience and that being really recognized is really happening a lot now. I can remember it was really full on if someone spoke about mental health. Like when I was a teenager, there was a book called Prozac Nation in the 1990s. That was, whoa, because people were like very scared to talk about mental health. But it's so great that it's opening up. And you described when you revealed about your anxiety on air and what had been happening for you previously. A lot of the stuff that gets internalized then kind of spills out into our life, where it starts to impact work, partners, all that. I guess, how was it starting to exhibit? Because often, the shame and the distress about not being able to be the best for our external life really feeds into that, doesn't it? So it goes beyond what's going inside.
Yeah, shame's been a big thing for me, something I'm still working through. And, that I think happens from when we're like 0 to 7. Like if you look back into all this stuff, research and everything that we're coming out now, but shame was a massive thing for me. But when I was working on air at the time, I didn't have the tools that I have now. I didn't have the ability. Like I remember feeling so anxious my last week in Big Brother. I could have had these conversations. I could have been changing the conversation and the stigma right there and then, but I was so in my own head, and I felt so much shame that people thought this about me, that my husband and all his friends were going to think I was fat on TV. And the same kind of thing started happening when I was on radio. So I would speak in the morning quite vulnerably and open. That's the kind of person I am. I wear my heart on my sleeve. I am sensitive. Like I do sometimes feel rejection if the boys were like talking over me or like didn't want to hear what I had to say. And I started to really start to feel this intense shame, then started bubbling out as panic attacks. So I would be on air, literally laughing with the boys. Then the next minute I would be having a panic attack in the toilets, and then I would come back and I would have tears running down my eyes, and we would turn the mics on and we would all laugh. And you know what? It was actually probably great break of state. They really helped, made me change my state pretty quickly. But that was like a real big roller coaster. And doing breakfast radio anyway is like pretty much running a marathon before 9 a.m. every day. Like you're up at 5, between 4 and 5, you're watching the news, you're coming up with content ideas, you're having conversations, you're performing. And so I was having that all with this mental health battle going on. And I think like I just didn't have the ability to speak up. And I didn't have the ability to tell people what I need and what I want. And now even like, my mum rang me the other day and I was feeling quite overwhelmed. So I took the afternoon off. I was just watching shit TV on the couch and she called, but I was so tired because that's when my anxiety will get triggered, when I'm really tired and, got something big coming up or whatever. And now I just said, Mum, I can't actually talk about that conversation right now. Like it's a boundary here. I said, I'm really sorry. And you could tell she was a little bit taken aback, but she was like, oh, no, we don't have to have the conversation now. Like, I'm not saying, and I was like, yeah, no, I just have to say this because I was like, I'm actually feeling overwhelmed just by you trying to have the conversation with me. Like it's taking my anxiety to a whole nother level. And I say that to husband now, like when he's at, nighttime, he wants to start talking about something. I'm like, hey, babe, like I can't do this conversation right now. And so I've got all these tools now. I've got this self-confidence, this belief that like, I'm not going to piss someone off if I speak up and say what my needs are. Like I'm definitely still working through that, but I've got to a point now where when my last few years of radio, I would talk about having headlines with one of my bosses. So she was like, okay, she could tell if I was anxious just by my body language, how I was on air that day. No one else could probably really tell, but she was the one that helped me come out to basically talk about my anxiety. But she would say, well, what are you feeling today? And I would kind of didn't know how to say to her. And she was like, okay, well, what about we could do headlines? And this is something I worked with my psychologist on. And it was like, instead of me coming in feeling like I hadn't been heard by the boys or whatever, I just need to rant about it, Amanda. This is the headline today. I don't need you to say anything. I just need to rant, or I just need a hug, or I actually need to have a conversation with the boys. I don't know how to have it, but this is something that is playing on my mind. So that's how I got through a lot of those dark times and learnt to speak up. And I'm still learning to speak up because it is scary. I feel a lot more comfortable having conversations with you, Emily, and the public than sometimes my loved ones. And so I get when people are like, oh, but I don't know how to speak up and say I have anxiety, or, that I'm experiencing mental health issues or whatever. So I get it. I see you and I understand what you're going through, but I promise you it's the best thing that you can do, is to just start having the conversations.
We'll be back after a short break.
We recognise people with lived experience of mental ill health and disability, as well as their families and carers. We recognise their strength, courage and unique perspective as a vital contribution to this podcast so we can learn, grow and achieve better outcomes together.
We'd love you to share Get Real with your family and friends.
You can also rate and review Get Real on your preferred podcast listening player. Your reviews help people find us.
At Irma 365, we believe in the potential of everyone.
Irma 365 is a lifeline for people who are challenged with complex mental health and disability.
Our work supports people to improve their quality of life and reach their personal potential.
We walk side by side with people, providing them with the support they need to live the lives they want within a supportive community.
Find out more about Irma 365 online at www.irma.org. That's ERMHA.org.
Yeah, it's really powerful. And I was absolutely thinking of boundaries when you were speaking and then you spoke about it, because that's something I know for me I'm working on. And I'm like, I should know this stuff, but it feeds into that people pleasing, that kind of got to do it all, mum, working, this, that. And I've actually only just started at age 45 to really be like, no, I can't do that. No, I don't have to take that on. I can say no and the world's not going to fall apart. It's been a real learning experience. And just from your book and from what I've seen about what you do, it's something that women are desperate for. I'm curious about, you've got a massive Instagram following. What are the main things that women contact you about?
Yeah, so I think most recently it's been about business because I went down the business line. But interestingly, it all comes down to confidence, which is what my book is all about. It's they're not confident in pitching themselves to the media because they're worried about being rejected, which all comes back to what's going on in our mind, which is what this podcast is all about, right? But before, when I did start speaking really openly about anxiety and mental health and body confidence, I am inundated all the time. Like when I walked through the shopping center in my bra and undies a couple of years ago, which I'm about to do it in Melbourne, actually. We want people to be there because it's the energy as well. You don't have to take your clothes off to get this confidence. You can get it just by being around other people. The point of why I was saying that is that's when I get messaged by a lot of people. The body confidence stuff is massive. And I talk a lot about exposure therapy. That's been huge for me. And I delve into that in the book, which is
can you tell us more about that? I've never heard of that.
Well, so the walk of no shame is exposure therapy, right? So we walk through a shopping center in our bra and undies. So for me, when I wasn't comfortable with wearing a bikini, which was pretty much most of my life until I was in my 30s, I had to start somewhere. And so with exposure therapy, think about it. They use it with psychologists and everything. So if you're frightened of a spider or whatever, they'll start to expose you to spiders to break through this worry and pain of like, you know, the scaredness that you feel, the fear. And so I chose to use exposure therapy through building my self-confidence. And so with the women that message me about sending a pitch to the media, I'm like, well, the only way we're going to break through this rejection and actually be rejected is if we send the fucking message. And it's like the only way we're going to say, screw you. I've got my fingers up, by the way. Wow. And screw you and F you to unrealistic beauty standards and, you know, what society thinks is by fronting up in public. And that's how kind of like we got into our bra and undies. So I was the girl who wouldn't wear even board shorts to the beach. Then I started to expose myself to a bikini. How did I do that? I started trying it on in change rooms. That was the first step. Didn't buy the first bikini. Then I bought a bikini, wore it once, absolutely hated it, never felt more self-conscious in my life. Threw it in the bin, and that was it for a few years. Then I went back and I started wearing a bikini again, and I just started around the house. And this is what I say to people, like, that's exposing yourself to being in a bikini if that's where you want to get to. This is if you want to wear a bikini. You can use this in any part of your life. Then I got really comfortable wearing a bikini to the beach. So I decided, like, I'm really comfortable in a bikini now. What would make me really uncomfortable? Oh, let's do a photo shoot in a shopping center, and got women together, and taking off our clothes symbolizes the bullshit stories, the mean girls, society's expectations. That's what the clothes symbolize for me. And then what you see is me in my vulnerability. All my body parts. This is my beautiful stretch marks from when I had a baby. These are my dimples that are on my bum, not on my cheeks, you know, that I want to celebrate. And I want to show the world that we are more than what we're told we are. And so that's what exposure therapy is. So I use it all the time. Just even coaching women now, like who come into the business side of things with me. It's like, what is the thing that scares you the most? And it's like, that's what we're going to work on. Like, I'm scared of the ocean. I live 600 meters from it, but I swim in it every day because I'm scared of sharks. I'm scared of waves. I'm scared of seaweed. So I go swimming in the ocean every day to build my confidence in the ocean. And now I love it. Yeah. Am I scared still? Yeah. But the only way I can keep going is by exposing myself to it. That's how I'm going to get people to come to the walk of no shame like you.
Wow. So many details in your book really resonated with me. Even when you wrote about it and you mentioned before, you know, you'd only wear like cardigans. I mean, I really relate to that, where I wouldn't wear like singlet tops or stuff. I've started
that was me.
You realize just how insidious it all is in your life.
And how much power we're giving away to other people. And this is the thing, like, it comes back to our power. Like, for me, the biggest moment for me was like, I want to be at the beach every day with my son. I want to be running around feeling awesome, like with him, being in joy. But if I'm constantly worried about what other people think, then I'm not going to be in the moment with him. So I really had to work through like getting my power back. And I think, you know, this is the thing, like, that for us women, like especially women, we worry about like, oh my God, they're judging me because I'm on my phone at the playground. Like, oh my God, my kid's hitting the other kid. Like, I'm such a bad mom. Like, I'm going through that right now. I'm not confident in being a mom. That's me being really honest, me exposing myself, saying, yep, that's the place that I'm working through. But it's these stories and these voices and everything that we've got going on in our head, and these expectations, that's where I want to release that from, you know, not just me, but others. And I've done that through like taking back my power. And, you know, just recently I was on Studio 10 doing the walk of no shame. And, you know, we ran into the ocean in our bra and undies, and it's not going to be for everyone. And some people are like, why do you have to get into your bra and undies? Even my mum, she's like, why do you have to get into your bra and undies or your swimmers? Like, can't you just build your confidence other ways? And I was like, yeah, you can. And there's other ways that I build confidence, and I talk about that in my book. But doing exposure therapy moves mountains of shit in a really small amount of time. And it won't work for everyone, but the studies that they've done on exposure therapy, especially around anxiety, that it just moves so much stuff in a really small space of time. And so that's why I choose to do it. And in the moment, I'm creating a movement and I'm creating conversations and I'm making other people feel less alone. And when we did it in Perth, the Walk of No Shame, it was life-changing. And I'm so shit scared to do it in Melbourne, like so absolutely petrified, but that's why I'm doing it.
Yeah, well, the weather will be a bit warmer, which is a good thing. We've had very cold weather.
Oh, yeah, we don't want to get those cold nips out.
That's it. And just like, ooh, shivering. It is inspiring, and it shows that there's all these different ways for women to, as you say, reclaim their power. The title of the book is Drunk on Confidence, and it's for 3 words, it's very powerful. So tell us why you called it that.
Well, I think, I was always the girl who was drunk on champagne to get my confidence, like even though I worked in breakfast radio and was putting myself out there, I was still wearing a mask, and I think on the weekends when I would start to feel like, oh my God, what have I spoke about this week? Like I've put my vulnerability out there. I'd get in my head, I would drink. And then that would give me this confidence to be like, oh my God, like I'm so hot right now. And I feel like, I started to see myself differently in the mirror, and it took away those anxieties and those insecurities. And then maybe I would hook up with someone, and then that would give me this whilst I was drunk or taking drugs or whatever. And it would give me this sense of like even more confidence. But then the next day, all that confidence was gone. And I realized that that's where I was finding my confidence was on the weekends, when I was drunk or high or whatever. And it wasn't until I had that big breakthrough moment here in Perth that I realized I was drinking a lot there. And again, it was like, you think like this is the thing. So many of us do drink to relax our anxiety. It's in social situations. Yeah, I've got this. I'm self-assured. I know what I'm talking about. I'm confident as, I don't give a fuck what you think. I don't care if you judge me. So many of us still use that. And what I realized when I had those really dark days was I was like, wow, I'm relying on this so much, but I'm feeling 10 times worse the next day. So it was a vicious cycle. So I had time off alcohol, and then my relationship with alcohol now is I'll have a few drinks, but I don't get blind drunk, but drunk on confidence, because I've been on this self-discovery journey, which you read about. And what I realize now is that I am drunk on confidence. That's why I'm the girl that can walk through a shopping center in my bra and undies. I can show up on social media as me. I can send a DM to pitch myself a podcast like this or to the media. I've got a whole bunch in my phone that I'm going to send to some big, podcasts after this, but I'm scared, but I'm drunk on confidence doing it because I believe that the conversation is bigger than me and the movement is bigger than me. So that's kind of how I came up with the name. It was interesting working with our publishers because we've got the same publisher. The book was actually called, are you ready for it? Here's a little sneak peek. You're So Fat and Other Bullshit Lies You Tell Yourself. And I loved it. I loved the title. But
provocative. It's provocative.
Right. And then I was like, when we wanted it to be positive with the front, like me standing at, posing, power posing, like showing my confidence, You're So Fat and Other Bullshit Lies just didn't roll with it. So Sharon and I went back and forth. Then I did my Walk of No Shame on Studio 10. And I was talking to the girls on Studio 10, and I went back and I watched it. And in the first few seconds, I was like, I was always the girl who was drunk on champagne. And then I was like, I am now the girl who's drunk on confidence. Bang. I was like, Sharon, I've got the name. It was 6 a.m. in the morning. And I was like, I've got the name. And she was like, oh, yes, I like it. And then she's like, actually, I love it. And then went to the sales team. And for me, it was like, yeah, this is the name. What the hell was I thinking?
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
But it took me doing the thing, like actually going and being in the public eye in my bra and undies on national TV to actually realize like, oh yeah, that's who I am. I am the girl. Like most people would say, is she fucking drunk on TV? Like, do you know what I mean? And it's like, no, I'm drunk on life. I'm drunk on confidence now because I find so much joy in the things that I do now and the way that I show up. Whereas before I had to have champagne to do that.
Yeah, it's great stuff. These conversations, I'm loving this conversation. And I guess for you, you've had that big journey through discovering about how to take care of yourself, and the journey's ongoing. But what are some of your best self-care tips at the moment? How do you look after your mental health and well-being?
Yeah, this one's actually not in the book. Wish I put it in the book, but it's been huge for me. I turn my phone off at nighttime on flight mode between like 5, 7 p.m. And then I don't turn it on till the morning until between 7 and 9 a.m. And I don't sleep with my phone in my room. And so how does this help you build confidence? By you're not scrolling. You're not feeding your mind with mindless bullshit, comparing yourself. You know, you're stimulating all that crap in your head, like the Mean Girls going nuts. You're literally taking it away, and you're present with your family, or you're watching TV or whatever, but you're not sitting there scrolling. Like, you're actually doing the thing that you're doing with intention. And then now I read before bed, which that's been a habit of mine for like the last year. And the phone sits outside my room. And then in the morning, the first thing I do is I have to connect with myself. And I've got to connect with a loved one. So like Memphis, my son, or my husband, a kiss, hello, like before I check my phone. Because what happens is when we check our phone, especially for those around anxiety, like we might get a work email, we might get, you know, a message on Instagram, a comment or whatever, instantly we're giving our power away because we're starting to focus our energy on someone else, and then we can be triggered, and then all of a sudden that's how we're going to feel for the next few hours. So if you fill your cup up first, that's been huge for me. And then another thing that I talk about in the book is like, we have the power to unfollow, and you know, that seems so simple but people aren't using it, or muting. And so I did a test a few years ago where I actually examined my thoughts when I was following people online. And what I realized, there was these accounts that I thought were inspiring me because I actually liked the person, but my mean girls were getting really, really loud. And so I took the time out, I unfollowed them, and then all of a sudden these mean girls had disappeared. They weren't coming up for other accounts. So I think the power of choice, the other huge thing that I talk about in my book, which has just been an absolute game changer for me, is 1% changes. So walking through a shopping center in your bra and undies exposure therapy, that's a huge self-care and self-love tool for me, but it's not a 1%er, you know, like that's a huge,
it's 1,000%er.
Yeah, that's 1,000%er, but you get the rewards for it. The 1%ers are the 1% things that you can do every single day to unleash your confidence, to unleash, you know, around your mental health, like better self-care practices that you can do in under 5 minutes a day. It's like walking outside, the first thing you do in the morning, not picking up your phone, turning it on, walking outside, going and breathing. What can I see? Like all that mindful, you know, all the mindful stuff. Another thing might be like, you know, your 1%er, if you want to build your confidence online as a business person, you know, or, you know, with a media background or whatever, start showing up. Like, can you do one photo on social media with your face and like do an introduction? So those 1%ers are, you know, outside your comfort zone. You can't grow in the comfort zone. You got to step into your courage and be brave to start doing those 1%ers. So for me, that's what I did. And within a year, I had made 365% changes. Like I go to the beach in winter now and have a swim. Not every single day because the waves get really hectic, but I will still put my 1%ers in there. It might be like that you want to drink a glass of water every single morning. It might be your 1% that you read one page of a book at nighttime. Oh, I can't read. I've got this going on in my head. Well, you actually can. You can read one page and you'll read a whole book in a year. So those are the kind of things that I do. So I just made it really simple for myself. And that's how I've got to where I am.
I'm so inspired. And, you know, it's stuff that, like some of the stuff I'm like, I know I shouldn't be on my phone and it's bad for my mental health.
It's not your fault. You're addicted because they've made it that. I watched a video today. And so this is another thing I do. So 1%er, I watch like a 10-minute inspirational video or listen to a podcast, whatever, at the start of the day, write in my journal, do a little bit of a stretch and yoga before I do anything. Then I'll go see Memph when he wakes up. So I do that my own time. But I watched this video today and it's like Facebook, social media was the fastest growing addiction ever in the world. And it's like, I know, and our phones, I know. So how can I make a choice, me, and not let it take my power? So I'll turn it on airplane mode when I'm middle of the day, like, you know, and I'll go sit outside and I'll have my lunch and I'll turn on airplane mode and just have 10 minutes on an airplane mode so that I'm not scrolling. Like, just take that control. It really is that simple.
I love it. This has been such a great conversation, and the book is fantastic, Drunk on Confidence. And
that means a lot because I know
it's really
your
good.
book is amazing, and what you put out there. You're an incredible podcaster and
thank you.
an author. I felt very like when I was like, oh my God, she wants to interview me.
I know. Well, I knew I'd seen your profile before, and actually before the book, I got the information about the book. I'd wanted to sort of put together a series of conversations about kind of the public eye and mental health. So it's sort of like perfect. And, for me, hearing what you're saying, it's like, yeah, like that confidence thing. I'll have to do some of your training, Heidi. I'm going to look into it. So as we wrap up, and I feel like we could talk all day, and I'll have all the links to stuff in the show notes, the book, your podcast, everything. What are your final thoughts for listeners? I guess we've talked a lot about a lot of stuff, but, vulnerability, taking care of yourself. What's your biggest hope, I guess, for your book and the work that you're doing with your podcast and your, empowering women and educating them?
I think my hope is, and this is like, it's interesting. We always get asked what our purpose is, don't we? And I have probably only just worked it out through the process of this book. And the reason why I wrote this book is because I don't want other people to feel alone. And so for anyone who pressed play today on this podcast, that's the exact same mission. I just hope that you feel less alone. I hope that you know that you aren't alone in the fight for life, which is like, it is fucking tough sometimes. And, we have to go through some really shitty situations, and sometimes we have to hit rock bottom, but I just want you to know that you aren't alone. And especially on the confidence, being drunk on confidence, this is women's biggest issue, I think, is that self-belief and that self-confidence. So please know that you aren't alone. It's crazy how it's so simple, that my purpose, it was sitting right in front of me the whole time. And that's why I show up on social media the way that I do now, because I feel less alone, and I know other people, it gives them permission to be themselves as well. And so they in return don't feel alone either.
Wow. What a great interview, Heidi. I'm so grateful you've come on. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
You've been listening to Get Real, talking mental health and disability, brought to you by the team at Irma 365. Get Real is produced and presented by Emily Webb with Corinza Louis-Smith and special guests.
If you've been affected by anything discussed in this podcast, you can phone Lifeline on 13 11 14 or go to lifeline.org.au.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.